everyone, and welcome back to U.S. History. Today, we are looking at our second lesson on the Reconstruction period. This one is titled The President and Congress Clash. Let's see what this is about. Well, Vice President Andrew Johnson was a Southerner and a Democrat. Our Northern Republican president had chosen Johnson in this spirit of reconciliation with the South and reuniting the nation. So a Southerner and a Democrat made sense. He had also secured the vote of a number of Democrats who supported the war along the border states. So Johnson was a good political choice and certainly helped Lincoln put forward this message of reconciliation and this message of unity, but was a bad choice if Lincoln planned on dying. Now, I don't think Lincoln planned on dying, but things don't always go according to plan. As president, however, Johnson did promise to continue Lincoln's policies, but that doesn't go very well. Radical Republicans are very disappointed in Johnson, and they see him as weak, politically weak, not a person who has a lot of support in either the North or the South. So the radical Republicans who want to punish the South, remember, are going to seize this as an opportunity to really take control of the government. When Johnson didn't push for punishing the South, which was in line with what Lincoln would have done, the radical Republicans withdrew all political support from Johnson, and he basically had a hostile Congress for his entire presidency. Now, Johnson's plan for Reconstruction closely followed Lincoln's. He wanted to go with what Lincoln had said, the 10% oath for the state to be readmitted, and basically all you need to do is give an oath and you're back in. He pardoned almost anybody who asks for a pardon. So if a general of the Confederate government asked for a pardon from the federal government, he gave it to him. And by late 1865, all Southern states did have new governments in place. Radical Republicans hated this. They really hated it because they saw this as allowing traitors back into their country. They were furious with Johnson and started to think of him as a traitor as well. Now, black codes are something that's worth looking at here and going into greater depth at a later time. Southern governments abolished slavery. They had to. It was a constitutional amendment. But they did pass laws called black codes. Black codes denied basic rights to African Americans. So African Americans were free, but free without certain rights. They didn't have equal citizenship, one might say. Now, Johnson, who was a former slaveholder, did not push for civil rights in any way. He simply said, the 13th Amendment abolished slavery. That's as far as we need to go. We don't need equality in our society, was Johnson's point of view. Black codes, a few examples include that you couldn't own property and you couldn't own a gun. You also weren't allowed to vote. And if you had no job, that is, you couldn't find an employer, you could be arrested and forced to work for no pay. That sounds an awful lot like slavery to me. I don't know about you. All right, Congress against the president. Well, Congress knew they could overturn almost any presidential decision. Congress could simply, if the president wanted to do it, Congress could deny him the funds or pass laws to deny that power. They had a lot of power to overturn the president's actions. They also created an institution called the Freedmen's Bureau. The Freedmen's Bureau set up offices throughout the South, and their job was to look after African American society and to make sure that they were not being abused by Southern laws and Southern black codes, to make sure that the law was taking care of African Americans. Now, we did eventually have a Civil Rights Act of 1866, which guaranteed basic rights. Johnson vetoed these laws, but his vetoes were overturned. Congress was so firmly in the radical Republicans' hands that Johnson vetoing something just didn't matter. He couldn't cancel the laws of Congress. Congress could overturn him. And so we wind up getting some civil rights actions being taken during the Johnson era. Fearing that the Supreme Court might overturn the Civil Rights Act of 1866, Congress strengthened that law by passing the 14th Amendment. The 14th Amendment says that all citizens are entitled to equal protection of the law, that you could not have some laws for blacks and some laws for whites, that was in and of itself illegal. You can't have it. Every person, every citizen is entitled to the same rights. Now, this enters into the period of radical Reconstruction. After the congressional elections of 1866, Reconstruction was completely controlled by radicals in Congress. They were 100% in charge. They ran the country. Don't think Johnson ran the country. He did not. Radical Republicans in Congress did. And nearly every presidential decision was and could be safely overturned. And so we get these radical laws. In 1867, all state governments in the South, with an exception of Tennessee, were abolished. They got rid of them. They said, Johnson let you back into the Union too quickly. No good. We're getting rid of them. And they took away all of those governments. They sent the military down, and they took over the South again. And martial law was imposed. Generals ran these states. To be readmitted, the state needed to pass a state constitution that guaranteed African Americans the right to vote. If you weren't willing to do that, you didn't get to be a state. Now, to control President Johnson, radicals made it illegal for the President of the United States to fire a cabinet member without Senate approval. Johnson couldn't fire any of these people who had been brought in by Lincoln. However, Johnson immediately challenged us by firing his Secretary of War, a member of his cabinet, and a radical Republican. Now, Congress impeached him. That is, they brought him up on charges. But in the Senate, they decided that this was really a political action and not a crime, and that they shouldn't be kicking presidents out of office for political purposes, only for criminal actions. And so the Senate, by a one-vote majority, decided that that would be a terrible precedent to set, and Johnson remained president. That doesn't mean he gets to be president for long, though. In 1868, President Johnson doesn't run for re-election. He's not going to win. He knows that. Republicans nominate General Ulysses S. Grant, the man who defeated General Lee and ended the war, and Democrats nominated a nobody who you don't need to know, but it's Governor Horatio Seymour. Anyway, Grant wins. The popular vote was close. It was narrow, but Grant won this election easily, and we will be talking about Grant a little bit more as we continue with our future discussions on Reconstruction. But that's all for today. I hope that you learned something, and farewell.